Silver Creek's wealthiest resident was on the verge of committing the most catastrophic error of his existence, and began with a simple cup of coffee that would ultimately destroy everything he possessed. Thunder Morrison adjusted his weather hat as he entered Murphy's drinking establishment, the harsh December wind slicing through the timber walls like a blade. Beyond the walls, snow descended heavily and without mercy, transforming Silver Creek into an icy wilderness. However, within the saloon, something captured his focus that made him completely forget the frigid conditions. Working behind the counter, a young lady with reddish-brown hair pulled back in an untidy knot was delivering beverages with hands that trembled uncontrollably, not from anxiety, but from the bitter cold. Her lightweight clothing provided no defense against the winter chill that appeared to penetrate every gap in the structure. Her mouth had assumed a faint blue color, and she continuously rubbed her arms during breaks between serving patrons, attempting to restore circulation to her fingertips. Thunder observed as she accidentally let a glass slip from her grasp, the crash resonating throughout the establishment. The barkeeper, a stocky individual named Murphy, instantly started yelling at her from the opposite side of the room. The woman's shoulders stiffened, yet she remained silent, simply kneeling to gather the shattered fragments with those same quivering hands. What impressed Thunder wasn't merely her evident misery. It was how she carried herself in spite of the cold, in spite of the shame. There existed something unshattered in her bearing, something dignified that refused to yield even when her physical form was clearly betraying her. Thunder had witnessed enough. He walked toward the counter, reaching into his jacket pocket for the bundle of currency he consistently carried. Money had never been an issue for him. It never had been. What he hadn't anticipated was the response he was about to receive. The woman glanced up as he drew near, her emerald eyes alert despite her obvious weariness. Before Thunder could speak, before he could extend his assistance, she addressed him first. Her voice was rough, likely from the cold, but it possessed a strength that caught him off guard. She informed him that she had no need for his charitable offerings, that she had encountered his kind previously. Wealthy men who believed their money could remedy everything, who assumed a few coins could purchase whatever they desired from a desperate woman. Thunder attempted to clarify that this wasn't his purpose, that he simply wished to aid someone who was clearly in distress. However, the more he spoke, the more defensive she became. She charged him with looking down upon her, with believing he was superior to the people who labored in establishments like this. The exchange attracted notice from other customers. Some recognized Thunder despite his simple attire. Murmurs began circulating through the saloon. The woman observed the shift in atmosphere, saw how people were staring at them, and her expression changed from defiance to something more akin to fear. Murphy, the bartender, had been monitoring the conversation with increasing interest. Now he approached them, a smile spreading across his features that failed to reach his eyes. He recognized Thunder as well, and suddenly his manner became excessively friendly, almost servile. He began apologizing for his employee's conduct, promising that she would show more respect to such an important patron. The woman's face grew pale, and not merely from the cold. She looked between Thunder and Murphy, and in that instant Thunder understood she was caught between two impossible options: accept help from a stranger she didn't trust, or face the repercussions from a boss who clearly wielded too much control over her existence. Thunder was about to learn that in Silver Creek, certain types of assistance came at a cost that no sum of money could cover. The woman shivering behind that counter was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous individual in the room is the one attempting to rescue you. Sometimes the most compassionate gesture can become the cruelest snare of all. Maggie Lane had absorbed that lesson through painful experience 3 years earlier in a settlement called Copper Ridge. That's why when Thunder Morrison offered to purchase her a coat, to pay for a warm meal, to help with whatever she required, every instinct within her being warned of danger. She had heard the whispers. She knew his identity now. Thunder Morrison, the cowboy who had become wealthy after discovering silver deposits on his property, the man who owned half the enterprises in Silver Creek, including the very structure where she now stood trembling. What she couldn't comprehend was why someone so powerful would concern himself with someone like her. Murphy's enthusiastic behavior only made matters worse. The way he suddenly began treating her as if she held value, as if she mattered only because a rich man was showing interest. It reminded her of every humiliation she had endured. Every instant she had been treated like merchandise rather than a human being. Thunder appeared a sense of distress, but instead of withdrawing, he did something unexpected. He removed his heavy winter coat and attempted to place it around her shoulders. The gesture was gentle, almost paternal, but Maggie pulled away as if it tried to strike her. The coat fell to the floor between them. Expensive wool-absorbing spilled whiskey and dirt. The entire saloon fell silent. Even the piano player stopped mid-song. That's when Maggie made the error that would alter everything. She bent down to retrieve the coat, and as she returned to Thunder, she spoke in a voice barely louder than a whisper. She told him about Copper Ridge, about the last wealthy man who had wanted to help her, about how his assistance had cost her everything she had ever valued. Thunder listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, he didn't attempt to convince her that he was different. Instead, he asked her one simple question. What would it require for her to trust that his help came without conditions? Before Maggie could respond, the saloon doors flew open. 3 men entered, shaking snow from their coats and stamping their boots. Maggie recognized them immediately, and the color vanished from her face. They worked for Judge Harrison, the man who essentially controlled Silver Creek from behind the scenes. The men approached the bar, but their attention wasn't on ordering drinks. They were looking at Thunder and Maggie, and their expressions weren't friendly. The tallest one, a man with a scar running down his cheek, addressed Thunder directly. He said the judge had learned about Thunder's interest in Murphy's employee, and he wanted to remind Thunder that some business arrangements in Silver Creek were already established in stone, that certain debts were still being paid, and interference wouldn't be welcomed. Thunder's demeanor shifted instantly. The gentleman who had been trying to help Maggie vanished, replaced by someone far more dangerous. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath when he asked exactly what kind of debt they were discussing. The scarred man smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. He looked directly at Maggie when he answered. He said she knew precisely what kind of debt he meant, the kind that couldn't be paid with money, the kind that required other forms of compensation. Maggie's hands began shaking again, but not from the cold this time. She looked trapped, like an animal that had just realized the cage door had been locked. Thunder took a step forward, positioning himself between Maggie and the 3 men. The movement was subtle, but everyone in the saloon noticed. Lines were being drawn, and everyone could sense that whatever happened next would determine more than just one woman's fate. But what none of them knew was that Judge Harrison had been watching this confrontation from across the street, and he had just made a decision that would turn Thunder's good intentions into the deadliest game Silver Creek had ever seen. Some debts are inscribed in blood, and Judge Harrison was about to collect. Thunder Morrison had confronted rustlers, survived gunfights, and built an empire from nothing. But standing in that saloon, looking at the fear in Maggie's eyes, he realized he was entering something far more dangerous than any shootout he had ever faced. The scarred man reached into his coat, and Thunder's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. But what the man extracted wasn't a gun. It was a piece of paper, yellow with age and covered in official-looking stamps. He unfolded it deliberately, making sure everyone in the saloon could see it was a contract. Maggie's name was written at the bottom in shaky handwriting, along with a signature that appeared to have been signed under coercion. The document stated that Margaret Lane owed Judge Harrison $500 for legal services rendered, plus interest that had been accumulating for 3 years. Thunder quickly calculated the numbers in his head. With the interest rates listed, Maggie now owed over $2,000, more money than she could earn in 10 years working at Murphy's Saloon. But that wasn't the worst part. The scarred man pointed to a clause written in small print near the bottom of the contract. If the debt couldn't be paid in currency, it could be satisfied through what the document called alternative service arrangements, to be determined by the creditor. Maggie's voice was barely audible when she spoke. She told Thunder that Judge Harrison had helped her when she first arrived in Silver Creek, desperate and alone. She had needed legal protection from something in her past, and Harrison had promised to help for free. Only after she had signed the papers did she discover the hidden costs. Thunder felt his anger building, but he forced himself to remain calm. He told the scarred man that he would pay Maggie's debt in full right there, right now. He reached for his money, ready to end this confrontation before it could escalate. The scarred man's smile widened. He said Thunder was welcome to pay the financial portion of the debt, but Maggie had already begun fulfilling the alternative service arrangements, and those couldn't be transferred to another party. Some contracts, he said, required personal satisfaction. That's when Thunder understood the full scope of what was happening. Judge Harrison wasn't just collecting a debt. He was using the legal system to trap vulnerable women, forcing them into situations they couldn't escape. And Maggie wasn't his first victim. Thunder looked around the saloon and noticed something he had missed before. Several of the women working there had the same haunted look in their eyes that Maggie did. They all moved with the careful precision of people who knew exactly what happened when they made mistakes. Murphy, the bartender, had been watching the entire exchange with growing nervousness. Now he stepped forward, wringing his hands. He told Thunder that he was just following orders, that he didn't make the rules, that everyone in Silver Creek had to follow Judge Harrison's arrangements if they wanted to stay in business. Thunder realized that the corruption ran deeper than just one crooked judge. The entire town was built on a system of fear and exploitation, with Harrison at the center, like a spider in his web. The scarred man folded the contract and put it back in his coat. He told Thunder that Judge Harrison appreciated his concern for the community, but that some matters were best left to those who understood the delicate balance that kept Silver Creek peaceful. But as the three men turned to leave, the scarred man delivered one final message that made Thunder's blood run cold. He said Judge Harrison looked forward to meeting with Thunder personally to discuss his future involvement in Silver Creek's business affairs. Tonight at courthouse, and that failure to appear would be considered an act of defiance against the law. Thunder watched him walk out into the snow, and he knew that everything he had built, everything he had worked for, was about to be put at risk. But what he didn't know was that Maggie was hiding a secret that would make Judge Harrison's threat seem like child's play. The snow kept falling, but inside Murphy's saloon, the temperature had dropped to something far more dangerous than cold. After Judge Harrison's men left, the saloon remained unnaturally quiet. The other patrons avoided looking directly at Thunder and Maggie, as if witnessing their conversation might somehow implicate them in whatever was about to unfold. Even Murphy had retreated to the far end of the bar, busying himself with cleaning glasses that were already spotless. Thunder turned to Maggie, expecting to see fear, maybe desperation. Instead, he saw something else entirely. She was studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she was trying to decide whether he was worth the risk she was about to take. Maggie moved closer to Thunder, close enough that her voice wouldn't carry to the other customers. She told him that if he was really planning to meet with Judge Harrison tonight, there were things he needed to know, things that could get them both killed if the wrong people found out she had shared them. She led him to a corner table, the one furthest in the bar and closest to the back exit. As they sat down, Thunder noticed that Maggie's hands had stopped shaking. The frightened woman from earlier had been replaced by someone calculating, someone who had clearly been thinking several steps ahead. Maggie told Thunder that Judge Harrison's operation was bigger than just exploiting desperate women. The contracts, the debts, the alternative service arrangements, they were all part of a larger scheme involving land rights, mineral claims, and territory disputes. Harrison had been using his position to systematically strip property from anyone who couldn't fight back legally. But here's what Thunder hadn't expected. Maggie wasn't just another victim. 3 years ago, before she came to Silver Creek, she had been Margaret Thornton. Her father had been a territorial judge in Copper Ridge, and she had grown up understanding exactly how men like Harrison operated. When her father had tried to expose a similar corruption ring in Copper Ridge, he had been found dead in what was ruled a hunting accident. Maggie had barely escaped town with her life, but not before stealing documents that proved the conspiracy went all the way up to the territorial government. Thunder felt the pieces clicking into place. Maggie hadn't ended up in Silver Creek by accident. She had been running, but she had also been investigating. For 3 years, she had been gathering evidence against Judge Harrison, using her position at the saloon to observe his operations from the inside. The contract Harrison held over her wasn't just about money, it was insurance. As long as he controlled her through that debt, she couldn't expose him without destroying herself in the process. And if she ever tried to leave town, he would have her arrested for theft. The same crime she had actually committed when she took those documents from Copper Ridge. Maggie reached into her dress and pulled out a small key. She told Thunder it opened a safety deposit box at the bank where she had been hiding copies of everything she had discovered about Harrison's operation. Financial records, forged documents, witness statements from other women who had been trapped by similar contracts. But she had reached a dead end. Harrison was too powerful, too well-connected. The evidence she had gathered would never see the inside of a courtroom because Harrison controlled the courts. She needed someone with resources, someone with influence, someone who could get the information to authorities outside of Harrison's reach. Thunder realized that Maggie hadn't been rejecting his help earlier because she didn't trust him. She had been protecting him because once he became involved in this fight, there would be no backing down. Harrison wouldn't just try to destroy his business or his reputation. He would try to destroy Thunder himself. If you were Thunder, what would you do? Take the evidence and risk everything you built to expose a corrupt system, or walk away and let Maggie face Harrison alone? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose, because what Thunder decided next would determine whether Silver Creek's darkest secrets would finally see the light, or whether they both end up like Maggie's father. The clock on the wall showed 6:30. Thunder's meeting with Judge Harrison was in 3 hours, and as he looked at the key in Maggie's trembling hand, he realized that the choice he made in the next few minutes would change everything. But neither of them knew that Murphy had been listening to every word they had said, and he was already reaching for the telegram pad hidden beneath his bar. Thunder Morrison had built his fortune by knowing when to take calculated risks, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He took the key from Maggie's hand, feeling its weight like he was holding a stick of dynamite. The metal was warm from her touch, and as their fingers brushed, he saw something in her eyes he hadn't noticed before. Not just fear or determination, but something deeper. Recognition. Maggie was looking at him like she had seen him before, somewhere other than the saloon, and suddenly Thunder felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December wind rattling the windows. Thunder told Maggie they needed to get to that safety deposit box before his meeting with Harrison, but as he stood up from the table, she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her voice was urgent when she told him to wait, that there was something else he needed to know first. She said his name wasn't really Thunder Morrison, was it? That 30 years ago, in a town called Broken Arrow, there had been a boy named Thomas Morrison whose family had been killed in what everyone said was an Apache raid. A boy who disappeared the same night and was never found. Thunder's hand instinctively moved to the scar on his neck, hidden beneath his collar. The scar, he told people, came from a horse accident. The scar that actually came from the knife of a man who had thought he had killed a 10-year-old boy that night in Broken Arrow. Maggie saw the recognition in his eyes and continued. She told him that Judge Harrison had been the territorial prosecutor who had handled the Broken Arrow case, that he had been the one who had ruled the deaths were Apache attacks, even though the evidence suggested otherwise, that he had been paid to cover up what really happened to the Morrison family. The room started spinning around Thunder. For 30 years, he had believed his family had been killed by Apache raiders. He had built his entire identity around surviving that tragedy, around becoming strong enough that nothing like that could ever happen to him again. But if Maggie was right, if Harrison had covered up the truth about his family's murder, then everything Thunder thought he knew about his past was a lie. Maggie reached into her dress again and pulled out a photograph, old and yellowed at the edges. It showed a young boy with Thunder's eyes standing next to a man and woman. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written Thomas Morrison, age 10, Broken Arrow, 1851. Thunder stared at the photograph, and memories he had tried to bury for decades came flooding back. The night riders would come to his family's ranch, the sound of his mother screaming, his father telling him to hide in the root cellar and not come out no matter what he heard. But most importantly, he remembered the voice of the man who had given the orders, a voice he had heard again today, in this very saloon, the same voice that belonged to the scarred man who had delivered Harrison's message. Maggie told Thunder that his family hadn't been killed for their land or their cattle. They had been killed because his father had discovered something about Judge Harrison's early corruption schemes, something worth murdering an entire family to keep hidden. Thunder felt 30 years of carefully controlled rage building inside him. All this time, he had been living in the same territory as the men who had destroyed his childhood, who had turned him into an orphan, who had stolen everything he had ever loved. If you're enjoying the story and want to see how Thunder gets his revenge, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Thunder looked at Maggie with new understanding. She hadn't just been investigating Harrison's current crimes. She had been investigating his past ones too. And somehow, she had connected Thunder's tragedy to Harrison's decades-long pattern of violence and corruption. But as Thunder processed this revelation, Murphy appeared at their table with a fresh bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. His smile was too wide, too nervous. And when he sat down the glasses, Thunder noticed his hands were shaking. Murphy told him the drinks were on the house, a gesture of goodwill before Thunder's big meeting tonight. But as Thunder lifted the glass to his lips, Maggie knocked it from his hand with a sharp movement. The whiskey splashed across the table, and in the amber liquid, Thunder could see tiny white crystals that definitely weren't supposed to be there. Murphy's face went pale as he realized his plan had been discovered. And that's when Thunder understood that Judge Harrison wasn't planning to wait until tonight to deal with him. The corruption in Silver Creek ran so deep that even the bartender was willing to commit murder to protect it. When the hunter becomes a hunted, survival depends on who strikes first. Murphy stumbled backward, knocking over chairs as Thunder rose from his seat. The bartender's face had gone from nervous to terrified in the span of a heartbeat. He started stammering excuses, saying the crystals in the whiskey were just sugar, that he'd been trying to make the drink special for such an important customer. But Thunder had seen those same crystals before, in a mining camp where acclaimed jumpers had tried to poison a rival prospector. Arsenic, just enough to make someone sick, disoriented, vulnerable. Just enough to ensure that Thunder would walk into Judge Harrison's meeting tonight at a severe disadvantage. Thunder grabbed Murphy by the shirt and pulled him close. His voice was deadly quiet when he asked how long Murphy had been working for Harrison, how many other people had been served drinks with a little something extra mixed in. Murphy's confession came tumbling out. He said he had been reporting to Harrison for years, ever since the judge had helped him out of some legal trouble. Everyone who came into the saloon, everyone who asked too many questions or seemed like they might cause problems, Murphy was supposed to keep tabs on them. But tonight was the first time Harrison had asked him to actually poison someone. Murphy swore he had never done anything like this before, that he was just following orders, that he was scared of what would happen to him if he didn't comply. Maggie stood up from the table, and Thunder noticed she was holding a small derringer that had appeared from somewhere in her dress. She told Murphy that being scared wasn't an excuse for attempted murder, and that he needed to decide right now whose side he was really on. The other patrons in the saloon had begun to notice the commotion. Some were moving toward the doors, clearly wanting no part of whatever was happening. But others were staying, watching with a kind of morbid curiosity that came from living in a place where violence was never far from the surface. Thunder realized they needed to get out of the saloon immediately if Harrison was willing to try poisoning him in broad daylight. There was no telling what other surprises might be waiting. But as he turned toward the front door, Maggie grabbed his arm and shook her head. She pointed toward the window where 3 figures on horseback were visible through the falling snow. Harrison's men, positioned to watch the saloon's main entrance. They had been waiting for Thunder to stumble out, weakened by the poison, easy prey for whatever Harrison had planned next. Maggie led Thunder toward the back of the saloon, toward a door marked private that Thunder had assumed led to storage rooms. But when Maggie opened it, Thunder saw it actually led to a narrow staircase heading down into what looked like a basement. As they descended, Maggie explained that Murphy's saloon had been built on top of old mining tunnels. During the silver boom, prospectors had dug shafts all through this part of town. Most had been abandoned when the easy silver played out, but some of the tunnels still connected different buildings. The basement was larger than Thunder had expected, with several passages leading off in different directions. Maggie moved confidently through the dim space, clearly familiar with the layout. She led him to a tunnel that she said would take them to the back of the general store, 3 buildings away from the saloon. But as they moved through the tunnel, Thunder heard footsteps behind them. Murphy had followed them down, and he wasn't alone. The sound of boots on stone suggested at least 3 or 4 men were making their way through the basement. Maggie pulled out her derringer and checked the chambers. 2 shots. Thunder drew his own gun, a Colt .45 that had never failed in the past. But in the narrow confines of the tunnel, with limited visibility and unknown numbers of enemies. Even the best gunfighter would be at a disadvantage. They reached a fork in the tunnel system. Maggie hesitated for the first time since they had entered the basement. She told Thunder that the left passage led to the general store, but it was a longer route that would take them past several other basement connections. The right passage was shorter and led directly to the bank, but it was a dead end that they got trapped. Thunder could hear their pursuers getting closer, voices echoing to the tunnels, men calling out to each other as they tried to determine which direction their quarry had taken. It wouldn't be long before they reached the fork. Thunder made the decision to go right, toward the bank. If they were going to make a stand, better to do it somewhere they could access Maggie's evidence. And if they didn't survive the next few minutes, at least the safety deposit box would provide some answers for whoever found their bodies. But as they hurried to the tunnel toward the bank, Thunder realized that Harrison had been planning this confrontation for much longer than just a day. The poison, the men watching saloon, even the tunnel system itself. Everything had been arranged to give Harrison maximum advantage. What Thunder didn't know was that Harrison had been waiting 30 years for the boy who had escaped from Broken Arrow to finally surface. And now that Thomas Morrison had returned, the judge was prepared to finish what he had started all those decades ago. The tunnel ended at a heavy wooden door that led into the bank's basement. Maggie produced another key from her dress, this one smaller and more worn than the safety deposit box key. She had clearly been planning this escape route for some time. They emerged into the bank's storage area, surrounded by filing cabinets and strong boxes. Above them, Thunder could hear the normal sounds of banking business. Customers conducting transactions, clerks counting money, the reassuring mundane activities of a functioning town. But the sounds behind them in the tunnels were getting closer. Their pursuers had figured out which direction they had taken, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the bank's basement. Maggie led Thunder to the safety deposit box area, a small room lined with numbered metal compartments. Box 47 was located near the back, partially hidden behind a support beam. As Maggie inserted the key and opened the box, Thunder positioned himself to watch both the basement entrance and the stairs leading up to the main bank. Inside the box was a leather portfolio tied with string. Maggie opened it carefully, revealing documents that represented 3 years of meticulous investigation. Financial records showing how Harrison had systematically stolen land from dozens of families, forged death certificates, witness statements from women who had been trapped by fraudulent contracts. And at the bottom of the portfolio was something that made Thunder's breath catch in his throat. A letter written in his father's handwriting, dated just days before the Broken Arrow massacre, a letter addressed to the territorial governor detailing Harrison's early corruption schemes and requesting a formal investigation. His father had known. He had been trying to expose Harrison through legal channels when Harrison decided that murder was the simpler solution. Thunder heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Their pursuers had found the bank entrance. Maggie quickly stuffed the documents back into the portfolio and handed it to Thunder. She told him there was one more tunnel, hidden behind a false wall near the back of the storage room. It led to the church, and from there, they could reach the edge of town. But as they moved toward the hidden entrance, voices echoed down from the main bank floor. Judge Harrison himself had arrived, and he was instructing the bank manager to lock the building down. No one in, no one out, until Harrison's business was concluded. Thunder realized they were trapped. The basement entrance was blocked by Harrison's men, and now the main floor was sealed as well. The hidden tunnel was their only option, but it would take precious time to locate and open a concealed door. That's when Maggie made a decision that shocked Thunder. She told him to take the portfolio and go. She would stay behind and create a distraction, give him time to escape with the evidence. She said her 3-year mission had always been about getting this information to someone who could use it, and Thunder was that someone. Thunder refused. He said they would face whatever came next together, that he wasn't leaving her behind to face Harrison alone. But Maggie's response revealed just how deep her planning had gone. She told Thunder that she had already sent copies of the most damaging documents to a federal marshal in Denver. If something happened to her, if she disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, those documents would automatically be released to territorial authorities. She had been prepared for this moment from the beginning. Her apparent helplessness, her vulnerability, even her fear, It had all been carefully calculated to position herself exactly where she needed to be when the time came to strike back. Thunder stared at her in amazement. Margaret Thornton wasn't just a victim seeking justice for her father's death. She was a strategist who had spent 3 years setting up the perfect trap for Judge Harrison. But Harrison had been playing this game longer than either of them. And as his voice grew close in the basement, Thunder realized that all of Maggie's careful planning might not be enough to save him from a man who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of making his enemies disappear. The sound of breaking would echo through the basement as Harrison's men found the tunnel entrance. They had minutes, maybe less, before the final confrontation that would determine whether Silver Creek's reign of terror would finally end, or whether 2 more names would be added to Harrison's long list of victims. Sometimes justice comes at a price that changes everyone who pays it. The hidden door behind the false wall opened into a tunnel barely wide enough for one person. Thunder could hear Harrison's men breaking through the basement entrance as he and Maggie squeezed into the narrow passage. The portfolio was pressed against his chest. 30 years of secrets and 3 years of evidence that would either save Silver Creek or die with them in these tunnels. But they had only made it 50 feet when Maggie suddenly stopped. She told Thunder she could hear something ahead of them. Voices. Men waiting in the tunnel near the church exit. Harrison had anticipated this escape route too. He had positioned his people at every possible exit, turning the entire underground network into a trap. Thunder realized that Harrison's corruption was so complete, so deeply embedded in Silver Creek's foundation, that he had decades to map every secret passage, every hidden route, every place someone might try to hide from his reach. They were completely surrounded, above them, below them, and now ahead of them. Judge Harrison had finally cornered the last survivor of the Broken Arrow massacre. But Maggie had one final card to play. She told Thunder about a shaft that led straight up from this tunnel. It had been part of the original mining operation, designed to provide ventilation to the underground workings. It was dangerous, probably unstable after all these years, but it was the only route Harrison's men wouldn't be watching. Thunder looked up and saw the shaft disappearing into darkness above them. Rusted iron rungs were still embedded in the stone walls, though some had clearly broken away over time. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. Maggie went first, testing each rung carefully before putting her full weight on it. Thunder followed, the portfolio tucked securely inside his coat. Above them, they could see a faint circle of light that marked the shaft's exit. They were 20 feet up when they heard Harrison's voice echo through the tunnel below. He had found their entry point and was directing his men to follow. The judge's voice carried clearly in confined space, and what he said made Thunder's blood freeze. Harrison called out to them by name, not just Thunder Morrison, but Thomas Morrison. He said he had been waiting 30 years for this reunion, that he had always known the boy from Broken Arrow would eventually resurface. He said Thunder's father had been a fool for thinking he could expose corruption in a territory where corruption was the only law that mattered, that the Broken Arrow massacre had been necessary to protect a system that kept the peace and made certain men wealthy. But most chilling of all, Harrison said that Thunder's survival had been an unexpected gift. For 30 years, Harrison had wondered if his work at Broken Arrow had been complete. Now, he finally had the chance to finish what he had started. Thunder and Maggie reached the top of the shaft and found themselves in what looked like an abandoned mining shed. Through gaps in the wooden walls, they could see they were on the outskirts of Silver Creek, near the old mining district. But their escape had cost them precious time. Below them, they could hear Harrison's men beginning to climb the shaft, and outside the shed, more voices indicated that Harrison had positioned people here as well. Thunder made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He told Maggie to take the portfolio and run. He would stay behind and buy her time to reach the federal authorities. But Maggie refused. She said they had come too far together to separate now, that if Harrison was going to win, he would have to kill them both to do it. Thunder drew his gun as the shed door burst open. Judge Harrison himself stepped inside, flanked by the scarred man and 2 others. Harrison was older than Thunder had expected, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had orchestrated decades of violence. Harrison looked at Thunder and smiled. He said that 30 years ago, he had made the mistake of assuming a 10-year-old boy was dead. Tonight, he wouldn't make the same error. But what Harrison didn't know was that Maggie had been telling the truth about the federal marshal in Denver. At that exact moment, a telegram was being delivered to territorial headquarters with enough evidence to destroy Harrison's entire operation. The confrontation in that abandoned mining shed lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, Judge Harrison's 30-year reign of terror was finished. But the cost of justice had been higher than either Thunder or Maggie had anticipated. Silver Creek would eventually heal from Harrison's corruption. New leaders would emerge, honest businesses would flourish, and the women trapped by fraudulent contracts would finally be free. Thunder Morrison returned to his ranch, but he was no longer the same man who had walked into Murphy's saloon that snowy December day. He had reclaimed his true identity as Thomas Morrison, survivor of Broken Arrow, and found the justice his family had been denied for 3 decades. And Maggie, Margaret Thornton, finally stepped out of the shadows she had inhabited for 3 years. She became the prosecutor who helped clean up Silver Creek's legal system, ensuring that no one else would suffer the way she and Thunder had. Sometimes the greatest act of courage comes from the most unlikely people. And sometimes when justice finally arrives, it transforms not just the guilty, but the innocent who fought to see it done. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales from the Old West, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you stories of courage, redemption, and justice from America's frontier. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video.